The desert wind whipped dust into spirals, stinging the eyes and choking the lungs. Clayton Mercer gritted his teeth against the heat as Boone's hooves thundered over the dry earth. His worn duster flapped wildly behind him, and the sweat on his brow mixed with the grit of the trail. Behind him, the deep, rhythmic growl of the locomotive grew louder, closer. The 809 train roared like a steel monster, its black smoke clawing at the sky. But Clayton didn't slow down. He couldn't. Not now. His legs gripped the horse tighter as he leaned into Boone's stride. The powerful animal surged forward, nostrils flared, driven by the urgency in Clayton's voice. "Let's go, boy," he muttered, his voice low and raw. He hadn't planned on riding that morning, certainly not like this. But one name, spoken aloud in that dusty telegraph office, had set his entire past on fire. Eleanor Harper. She was on that train, and he had less than a mile to reach her. 30 years had passed since he last saw her. 30 years since he'd left her crying on the porch of her father's ranch, promising he'd return after the war. But the war had taken more than time. It had taken his soul. By the time he came back, she was gone. Now, just the thought of seeing her again filled him with dread and something dangerously close to hope. What if she didn't remember him? Worse, what if she did? The whistle pierced the air again, long and sharp. Up ahead, the train began to slow as it approached the small platform near Red Ridge Crossing. It wouldn't stop for long. Boone galloped harder, his muscles straining. Clayton's fingers clenched the reins, his heart pounding louder than the engine itself. He hadn't rehearsed what he'd say. No letter could have prepared her. No apology could fix 30 years. But he had to try. He reached the platform just as the train hissed to a crawl. Steam poured from beneath the wheels, clouding the air. Passengers leaned out of windows, curious. Then, through the haze, he saw her. Eleanor stepped down from the train, graceful despite the cane in her hand. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and though her face carried the weight of time, those eyes, green and sharp, hadn't changed at all. She looked up, sensing something. Their eyes met across the dust and steel, and for a breathless moment neither moved. Eleanor Harper froze on the platform, her hand tightening slightly on the cane. The low hiss of the train faded into the background as her gaze locked onto the man standing a few yards away, covered in dust, hatless, and breathing like he'd outrun the devil himself. It couldn't be. Yet something in the way he stood, his shoulders tense, his jaw set, the way his eyes searched her face, brought back memories she had buried so deep she thought they'd died with her youth. "Clayton?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. The name lingered on her lips, strange after all these years. Part of her wanted to turn away, pretend she hadn't seen him, hadn't felt the earthquake of his presence in her chest. But her feet didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat, and all around her, the world narrowed to that one man. Older, weathered, but unmistakably him. Clayton stepped forward slowly, like approaching a wild animal, uncertain if it would run or bite. He removed his gloves, his hands trembling ever so slightly. "I didn't know if you'd remember me," he said, voice thick and cracked from the ride and the weight of unspoken years. "I wasn't sure if I should even try." Eleanor's eyes shimmered with something between disbelief and restraint. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her youth, Clayton returning, asking for forgiveness. But the years had changed her. Life had not waited. "You left without a word," she said quietly. "You didn't come back. Not when my father died. Not when I lost the ranch. Not even when I needed you most." He lowered his head, as if the sun was suddenly too bright. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you deserved better than a man like me. And when I did come back, it was too late. You were gone." Her lips trembled, but she held her ground. "You don't get to show up now and expect anything." The cane shifted slightly in her grip. You left a hole that never really healed, Clayton. He nodded, pain etched deep into every line of his face. I know, he said. But there's something you don't know, Eleanor. Something I should have told you 30 years ago. Her breath caught. The train behind her let out a low, final whistle, and steam clouded the space between them once again. When it cleared, the look in his eyes wasn't just regret, it was fear. And something else. Eleanor didn't speak for a long moment. The air between them felt thick, weighed down by the heat, the dust, and the things neither of them had the courage to say. She studied his face, creased and tired, with eyes that once held fire and now carried shadows. He looked like a man who had wandered too long without a home. But even now, something in her stirred. Something she thought was long gone. "What is it you think I don't know, Clayton?" she asked softly, her voice steady but brittle. He looked at her like a man walking toward a cliff, knowing there's no way back. "I wrote to you," he said. "When I was in Georgia after the war. I sent letters, months of them. I begged for a chance to explain, to come home, to see you again. But I never got an answer. Not one." His jaw clenched. "I thought you'd moved on. I thought you hated me." Her eyes flickered. For a second, confusion replaced the cool distance in her face. "I never got a single letter, Clayton." She shook her head slowly. "I waited for years. Every day I walked to the post office in town, hoping for your handwriting. It never came." Her voice cracked, and she turned away, gripping the cane like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I thought you had forgotten me." The silence that followed felt like a wound reopening. Clayton took a breath, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "Your father, Virgil. He was still alive then, wasn't he?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "He hated me," Clayton continued, "and he had the power to stop those letters." He paused, the truth settling heavy on his shoulders. "I think he did. I think he never let you see them." Eleanor's heart pounded. The idea wasn't far-fetched. Virgil Harper had been a hard, proud man who never believed Clayton was good enough for his daughter. But to interfere so deeply, to sever something so completely, it was a betrayal she hadn't considered. Her knees weakened slightly, and Clayton instinctively reached out to steady her. She didn't pull away. Not right away. Instead, she looked up at him with eyes wide and unsure. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Why today, after all these years?" Clayton hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "Because there's something else, Eleanor. Something I learned not long ago about you. About someone connected to you." Eleanor's grip on the cane tightened. The words hovered between them, heavy with implication. She searched Clayton's face, but he looked away, as if saying the truth aloud might undo the fragile thread holding this reunion together. "Connected to me?" she repeated, her voice lower, wary. "What are you talking about?" Clayton swallowed hard, dust clinging to the sweat on his face.
A month ago, I stopped in a little town outside Santa Fe, just passing through. There was a mechanic there, young man, mid-30s. He helped me fix a busted wheel on my wagon. He paused, watching her closely now. His name was Thomas Harper. The name hit her like a slap. Her breath caught, and she instinctively stepped back. "You met Thomas?" she asked, her voice trembling. How would you even know to connect him to me?" "I didn't at first," Clayton said. "He just seemed familiar. The way he walked, the way he thought before speaking. And then he looked up at me, and his eyes, Eleanor, they were just like yours." His voice cracked slightly. "Green. The same sharp green the first never forgot." He let the silence stretch. When I asked him about his family, he said his mother was Eleanor. Said he never knew his father. Eleanor turned her face away, but not quickly enough to hide the tear that slipped down her cheek. I never told him, she said, barely above a whisper. Not even when he was old enough to start asking. I told him his father was a soldier who didn't make it home. I didn't want him to grow up angry. Clayton's heart ached at the words. The image of the young man's face now made perfect sense. Why didn't you ever tell me, Eleanor? He asked. Even after all those years? She looked at him with eyes full of pain and fury. Because I didn't know if you were alive, Clayton, and when I stopped believing you'd ever come back, I had to move forward. I had to raise him alone. I didn't want to poison him with the same sorrow that nearly ruined me. She paused. And when he grew, when he became his own man, I was too afraid it would open the wounds again. Clayton stepped closer, voice low. I need to see him again. He deserves to know the truth. We all do. Eleanor didn't answer, but her silence spoke louder than any words, because she wasn't sure if revealing that truth would heal her son or destroy him. The ride into town was quiet. Boone moved at a steady pace beside the train tracks, while Eleanor sat inside the final passenger car, staring out the window, her fingers twisting the fabric of her skirt. The desert passed slowly, but her thoughts moved fast. Every mile closer to Thomas felt like stepping into fire. Memories, guilt, and questions she had buried for decades were now rising like dust behind Clayton's horse. Clayton hadn't spoken since they left Red Ridge. He kept his distance, riding ahead, his silhouette tall in the fading afternoon sun. But his thoughts were loud. He was a father. All this time, a son had grown into a man without him, without his name, without his voice, without his presence. The regret dug deep into his chest, sharper than any war wound he'd ever carried. He wasn't sure if he deserved to be forgiven. He only knew that Thomas deserved to know who he really was. When they reached the edge of Dry Creek, the train gave a final whistle and slowed to a stop. Eleanor stepped off slowly, her cane tapping the wooden platform as she scanned the familiar town square. The buildings hadn't changed much. The same old barber shop, the corner general store, the faded red barn near the blacksmith. Her heart pounded as she looked toward the garage on the far end of Main Street. The mechanic's shop. Thomas would be there. Clayton tied Boone to the rail and stood beside her. He looked older in the twilight, his shoulders hunched slightly, his hat low. I won't say a word unless he wants to hear it, he said quietly. I just want to see him. One time. Face to face. Eleanor nodded. He's a good man, Clayton. Kind. He grew into someone I'm proud of. But he's strong-willed. He doesn't like surprises, especially the kind that turn everything he knows upside down. They crossed the dusty street together. Clayton's boots echoed off the wooden boards of the sidewalk as they approached the garage. The sign above the door read Harper Auto and Repair. The lights inside were still on. Through the open bay door, the sound of metal clinking against metal rang out. Then the familiar voice, steady, deep, confident. Give me a minute. I'm almost done back here. Eleanor froze. Her hand found Clayton's without thinking. And when Thomas stepped into view, wiping grease from his hands, Clayton felt the breath leave his lungs. He was looking straight into a younger version of himself. Thomas paused when he saw them. Two figures framed by the doorway, backlit by the fading light of the desert evening. He wiped his hands again, slower this time, his brow furrowing. Ma? He asked, confusion flickering across his face. What are you doing here? I wasn't expecting you. Eleanor took a breath, her voice unsteady. I know. I should have sent word. But there's someone I needed you to meet. She turned slightly toward Clayton, and Thomas followed her gaze. The moment his eyes met Clayton's, something shifted. A flicker of recognition, or maybe just an uneasy instinct, passed over his face. Who's he? Thomas asked, voice firmer now, guarded. Clayton stepped forward, removing his hat slowly. His voice came low, careful. My name's Clayton Mercer. He hesitated, watching Thomas closely. I knew your mother. A long time ago. The words felt insufficient, but saying more too quickly could shatter the fragile line between them. He could see the tension rise in Thomas's jaw, the way his hands clenched slightly, the the way his stance widened. Defensive. Confused. Thomas looked at Eleanor again. "What is this?" he asked, quieter now but sharper. "Why does he sound like someone I'm supposed to remember?" His eyes narrowed. "Is he from the army? A friend of Dad's?" The word hung heavy in the air, Dad. A word Clayton had never earned. A word Eleanor had carefully left undefined all his life. Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hand trembled on the cane. "Thomas," she said softly, "there's something I never told you. Something I've carried for too long." She looked at him, her voice cracking. "Your father didn't die in the war. He didn't even know about you. Not until a few weeks ago." Thomas took a step back. "What?" His voice was quiet, but it trembled with something dangerous. His eyes moved between them, searching for something. Truth, perhaps, or a reason to run. "You're saying, this man?" He pointed at Clayton. "This man is my father?" Clayton's voice was hoarse. "I didn't know, son. If I had—" But the sentence died before it could take shape. Thomas turned away, walking slowly toward the back of the garage, each step heavy with confusion. He didn't slam the door. He didn't yell. He just disappeared behind the hanging curtain of tools. Eleanor looked at Clayton, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if he'll come back out." Behind the curtain of tools, Thomas sat on a worn stool, elbows on his knees, staring at the concrete floor. The distant hum of the oil heater buzzed in the silence, but in his head, everything was loud. His mother's voice, the stranger's face, the thunder of a truth that cracked 30 years of belief right down the middle. His whole life, he had made peace with the story she told. A father lost to war. A clean ending. A name he never had to question. And now that story was gone.
Clayton remained near the doorway, the brim of his hat pulled low, as if trying to make himself smaller. Every instinct in him wanted to follow Thomas, to sit beside him and explain, to say all the things he'd rehearsed in his head since learning the truth. But another instinct, stronger, warned him not to push. Not yet. This wasn't a moment for words. It was a moment for space, and for pain. Eleanor walked over to Clayton and whispered, "Let him breathe." Her voice was tight. She knew her son, knew his silence didn't mean acceptance or rejection. It meant everything was boiling just beneath the surface. She had seen him like this before, after losing jobs, after heartbreaks. But this was different. This was about identity, about blood. "He doesn't need explanations right now," she said. "What he needs isn't an apology. It's time." Inside the garage, Thomas stood up and walked toward the back exit, the door creaking open into the dry twilight. He didn't say anything to his mother. Didn't look at Clayton. Just walked out into the stillness, the sun bleeding red behind the hills. Clayton watched him go, a familiar ache rising in his chest. It reminded him of the day he rode away from Eleanor all those years ago. That same feeling of distance becoming permanent. "I waited too long," Clayton said softly. "He's a grown man now. He's got a life. What right do I have to walk in and change everything?" His voice cracked with something between shame and sorrow. "He didn't ask for me. Maybe he doesn't want to know me." Eleanor looked at him with tired eyes. "He may not want to know you today. But this isn't just about today." She paused. "He's stubborn, just like you. But he's also kind. And fair. Let him process it. And if he comes back, you'll have one chance. Don't waste it." Outside, in the fading light, Thomas stood alone under the awning of the old barn, jaw tight, arms crossed, and a storm building behind his eyes. Thomas stood with his back to the barn, arms crossed tightly, watching the horizon as if it might offer him some sort of answer. He heard the soft crunch of boots behind him before Clayton's voice broke the silence. "Didn't want to crowd you," he said gently. "But I figured you might want to say something. Or yell. I'd understand either way." Thomas didn't turn around. His voice was quiet, cold. "What exactly do you expect me to say? Nice to meet you, Dad? Sorry you missed the first 3 decades of my life? This isn't one of those stories that ends clean, old man." The words weren't shouted, but each one landed with precision, sharp and heavy. Clayton exhaled through his nose, eyes fixed on the dirt. "You're right," he said. "This ain't clean. I didn't come looking for a second chance or a pat on the back. Hell, I didn't even know you existed until a few weeks ago. But I swear to you, I would have come sooner if I'd known. I lost your mother once. I ain't trying to lose you without trying." Thomas finally turned to face him. The resemblance between them was undeniable now, especially in the way their jaws clenched when they were angry. "You say you would have come. But where were you when I was 13 and broke my arm falling off a horse? When I graduated high school and didn't have anyone in the crowd? When Mom got sick and I had to take care of her for 3 months straight?" His voice trembled at the end. "You weren't there. That's what I remember." Clayton took a step forward, voice steady but raw. "And you think I don't carry that every second of every day now? I missed your first steps. Your first words. I missed being your father, Thomas. I can't undo that. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking you to hear me out. Maybe give me a little space to be in your life now. However you'll let me." The barn was silent for a long time. Thomas looked down, jaw tight. The hurt ran deep, deeper than either of them had expected. Finally, he shook his head slowly. "I don't know what to do with this. It's too much. Too many years for one conversation." He looked up again, his eyes no longer furious, but filled with something quieter. "But I'll tell you this, I'm not walking away. Not yet." Inside the house, Eleanor watched from the window, her hand trembling against the glass. The next morning brought a strange stillness to Dry Creek. The heat hadn't yet risen, and the sky wore a pale orange hue as the town slowly woke. Clayton sat on the porch steps of Eleanor's small house, hat in hand, elbows on his knees. He hadn't slept. Not really. His thoughts had been a restless loop of things he should have said, things he still didn't know how to say. When the screen door creaked behind him, he expected Eleanor, but it was Thomas. The younger man sat beside him without a word. For a minute they just listened to the morning sounds, the rustling leaves, the distant engine of a passing truck, the faint call of a hawk overhead. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "I thought about it all night," he said, his voice calm but tired. "How I felt, what I wanted to say to you. And I realized something." He paused, glancing sideways. "I don't know how to be someone's son. Not like this." Clayton looked straight ahead. "I don't know how to be someone's father," he replied quietly. "But maybe we don't need to figure all that out today. Maybe we just try not to be strangers anymore." There was no grand speech, no dramatic gesture, just an honest offering. Something simple. Something real. Inside the house, Eleanor stood at the window again, watching the two men in silence. Her heart was heavy with things she'd carried for decades, decisions made, truths withheld, years spent surviving instead of healing. When she finally stepped outside, both men stood to greet her. She smiled faintly, but there was sadness in her eyes. "You both have something I never had," she said. "A second chance." Her voice cracked slightly. "Don't waste it like I wasted mine." Thomas stepped closer to her, touching her hand gently. "You didn't waste anything, Mom. You did what you had to do." But she shook her head. "I protected you the only way I knew how. But I also robbed you of the truth. And I robbed him of the right to be a father." She looked at Clayton. "I was so afraid he'd disappoint you. the same way he disappointed me when he left." Her voice dropped. "But now I see it wasn't that simple." Clayton reached for her hand, just for a moment. "None of it was simple," he said. "But maybe that's what makes it worth fixing." Thomas looked at them both, torn between anger and forgiveness, hurt and hope. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from it. In the distance, the whistle of the morning freight train echoed through the valley, steady and strong. The sun was high over Dry Creek when Thomas finally walked beside Clayton down the narrow path that led to the edge of town. They didn't speak much, just walked in quiet rhythm, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Boone followed behind, reins loose, as if sensing that this wasn't a ride to be rushed. For the first time, there was no pressure to explain, no past hanging over them like a storm. Just the present. Just two men trying. They stopped near the ridge where the train tracks curved into the horizon. It was the same place where Clayton had once raced beside the engine, chasing a memory. Now he stood still, watching the same sky, but with different eyes. "I used to think life was about getting somewhere," he said quietly. "But maybe it's more about showing up when it counts." He looked at Thomas. "Even if you're late." Thomas nodded slowly. "I don't know how this is supposed to work. We can't pretend the past didn't happen." He paused, then added, "But I guess we don't have to let it define the rest of it, either." There was a hint of a smile, small, unsure, but real. Clayton didn't answer, just placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. No words could have said it better. Back at the house, Eleanor sat on the porch swing, a cup of tea in her hand, watching the road. When she saw them return side by side, something in her chest relaxed. For decades she had carried the burden of what was lost. Now, maybe, something had been found. Not the past, but a future none of them expected. "You too hungry?" she asked with a soft smile. "I've got some leftover stew that's almost older than your father." Clayton chuckled, the sound deep and unfamiliar even to himself. "I could eat," he said, tipping his hat. Thomas smirked. "As long as you don't make him tell war stories at the table." They gathered around the small kitchen table, weathered, chipped, and warm with the kind of silence only families share. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fixed. But it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, they were all exactly where they were supposed to be. Outside, the whistle of the afternoon train echoed through the valley again, but no one looked up. They had already caught what mattered.